Game masters hold the keys to the universe in their hands. More than keepers of knowledge, they are creators. Entire pantheons, ancient civilizations rise from nothing and then fall to ruin. Compelling villains, a plot full of twists and revelations. You've created the perfect narrative, just waiting to be explored and discovered. But none of that matters if your players don't give a Actually, every signal I'm getting from my players is a blow to my self-esteem. Not only are they not all that excited about my lore dump, they also keep forgetting important plot points. The story stops progressing. They're having a hard time connecting the dots because they forget what dots there even are to connect, asking stuff like, oh, who's that NPC again? Or they just stop following the leads to go do something else entirely. So where does the problem come from? And mostly, how do we get our players from lost to completely obsessed?
Maybe it's not that we suck at world building, but that we need to get better at translating.
Let's entertain this thought for a little bit and try another meaning for the word exposition. Usually it means the description or explanation of background information within a work. But maybe it's more appropriate to think of it as the art of bridging a gap between the world you've created and the players exploring it. So focusing less on the information itself and more on the delivery of it.
But before the actionable tips, we need some ground rules, one in particular.
Purpose or perish? That's a scary name. Good.
Being really excited about world building means I'm likely to go overboard with it, and in turn overwhelm my players with an excessive amount of information, which means I need a guiding principle to filter all of that stuff.
Here's an idea that I just came up with for some world building. It's new and shiny and beautiful and I absolutely love it, but to make it into my game, it must first pass a test. Every scene or element that I want to add to my game has to serve a purpose. Most often, it's one of these two. It either drives the plot forward or it reinforces the tone. If the element that I want to add doesn't do any of these things, I get rid of it. Purpose or perish.
Because if I don't give it purpose, how are players supposed to engage with that information? That way, the information is kept short, easily digestible, and directly relevant to the situation.
This applies not only to world building, but to pretty much anything and will drastically improve the pacing of a game. Let's take a simple combat encounter with wolves. Maybe it's used to further the plot because the wolves are controlled by someone. Fighting them is going to give you clues to finding the puppet master. Or if it's used to reinforce tone, then a random encounter with wolves makes perfect sense in a survival horror campaign in which the wilderness needs to feel dangerous.
But I really like world building and all of this sounds really restrictive. Why would I ever want to deprive myself of something I like so much?
I mean, that's very fair. These limitations sound so frustrating when you have the creating itch. After all, to many of us this is a creative outlet. But wonderful news, the purpose or perish rule can be reverse engineered. If there's an element that you really want to add in, then you have an easy framework to follow in order to save it. You just have to give it a function and tie it to either plot or tone. And not only will purposeful, deliberate world building eventually become natural, but also creativity thrives under constraints and some really cool stuff might come up.
Okay, so we have filtered out the noise and kept the gems. Now how do I make sure it lands well? How do we deliver this information in a way that will stick with the players?
Show, don't tell is maybe not such great advice. It's great for books and movies, but in TTRPG we need to add a little twist to it. That little twist is something I learned as a teacher and it is a huge game changer. In its base form, Show Don't Tell says that instead of merely stating something, demonstrating it through detail does a lot more for immersion. In TTRPG, here's what it would look like. Instead of this, the PCs have been warned about the city of Belport. Since the mayor Quentin rose to power, the city's been drowning in high surveillance oppressive policies. Maybe try this. In the city of Belport, the party clocks a few strange things. The walls are now covered with wanted posters, or signs that say no loitering or unauthorized gathering prohibited. Guards are constantly patrolling the streets. And are those surveillance cameras? This is definitely better, really sets the stage and the mood. But in TTRPG, where the magic really happens isn't when you just tell or show. It's when you engage the players by making them do stuff, when you have them be active participants. Let's give it one more try. As the party is walking in the streets, they get aggressively intercepted by the city guard. This is a random check. What's your business here? Do you have proof of it and identification? We're gonna have to register your presence in town, purpose for visit, physical description, and of course search you for contraband. Your players better think quickly. How do they react to all of this? Do they comply? Do they try to lie their way through it? Players aren't just witnessing your world building, they're living it. This one was kind of an aggressive example, but even small stuff like traditions and customs is a lot more engaging when player characters are actively involved.
Even more than that, they're likely to develop personal opinions about it. That means they care. It's not just something that happens in the world anymore, it's something they have a connection to, something they have personal experience with. Which, by the way,
make it personal. Ultimately, what most engages a player is their own character, which makes sense. Everything they experience in the game, they experience through that lens. So how about we meet halfway? Generate excitement for your story for the players via their characters. There are many ways of doing it. Of course, the first one is to link elements of your plot or lore to your PC's drives and curiosities. Remember this high surveillance city we were talking about? Mayor Quentin is the one to blame for all these policies. I want my players to know he's a hypocrite and I want it to matter to them. I've also got a player whose character grew up an orphan, and Mayor Quentin just had a big PR event at the local orphanage. How is that character going to react when the kids tell him all about these pretty promises that Mayor Quentin has made and that he knows he's probably never gonna fulfill? We can also directly involve the players in the world building process. If you get excited about world building, there's a good chance that they too would be excited to take part. You can ask them to create or contribute to some part of the universe. Because they created something, they will be excited for the party to encounter it. My favorite though is giving each player a piece of information at character creation that only their character knows about and that will come into play at some point in the game. The fact that it's the secret, this one thing that only one person knows, it makes it feel special and the player is more likely to engage with it. Because what is more intriguing than a secret?
all these can be used as stepping stones to draw the players into your world. But bad news. This is all some big double-edged sword. All of our efforts are useless unless we shift our perspective a bit.
Hold nothing sacred. The biggest danger in seeking player engagement is wanting to force it, and players should have at least as much control as the GM on what direction the story should take. So maybe let's not hold our prep as sacred text. In practice, that means don't force players to follow your leads, just follow theirs instead. It's just redirecting that energy.
I talked about this one before, but one of my first game masters told me about the way he sees the game, and I kind of like to think of it as the GM's Schrodinger's box. He said that running the game was like handing your players one box to open. What the players don't know is that while they're opening it, you're stuffing that box from the bottom.
And no, it doesn't mean you should run headfirst into the game without prep, fully relying on improv. It means any element in the world or the story only becomes real once it hits the table. So your prep, your world building, your carefully plotted scenario, they're mostly suggestions. As long as the story only lives in your head or on Google Docs, it's not yet set in stone and is entirely subject to change. Maybe you had something planned for the real identity of the villain, but your players made this one NPC really angry and now you're thinking, what if? Do it! Make the change. Because if you truly want players to engage, you have to get comfortable with changing your plan.
It's maybe better to observe what the players engage with and then just build a story around that. If you think about it, everything that we said so far kind of revolves around that principle one way or another. My players really seem to like that one shy librarian. Awesome, I just found my next quest giver. Or hostage.
The best way to engage players kinda is to do it on their terms. When in doubt, just talk to them, they won't bite. If they do, you just bite harder. Assert dominance. And with this, I shall keep you no longer. I'm sure Google Docs is waiting longingly for you. On this note, have a good evening, and may your players beautifully annihilate every single plan you had.